All right, so I'm starting right back up. So I'm going to run through this entire quiz. And so, like, for example, administrator, Rebecca Langston. Well, administrator is in the book, and what it will say is let's see. Maybe it's not under administrator. Yeah, there we go. Administrative law judge, administrator. So it's over on this page here. And what it says, never abbreviate. Capitalize when used as a formal title before a name. So, it has, you can look up titles, has more, but it says capitalize when used as a formal title before and never abbreviate. So in this case, even though, like, for example, we abbreviate governor, administrator, it says never abbreviate. So you circle it and say write out. I think that's just because administrator is kind of an unusual title, and so people like governor, people recognize the governor is always in the paper. Administrators is a weird title. Usually people are president or chief executive, something like that. And so this is kind of an unusual title. I think is the only reason we write it out. Rebecca Langston works at 1400 Main Street. If you look up the address entry, anytime you have a full street address, you can abbreviate things like street, avenue, I believe boulevard, but there are some you never abbreviate, like road, circle, things like that. And so if you look up the address entry, it will give you information on that. But the important thing is addresses, use the abbreviation avenue, boulevard, and street only with numbered. So you need the number. If you don't have the number, you don't abbreviate. If you simply say somebody was on Pennsylvania Avenue, you would write avenue out. But if you have the street number, then you go ahead and do it. Now, what it also says, words like alley, drive, terrace. You do not always spell out. You don't abbreviate them. And that's just the way that is. And then it will say things like, it'll say, like, for 9th Street, we write out N-I-N-T-H, or 4th Street, we write F-O-U-R-T-H. The number before it, we always use the figure, but the street names we always write it out up until 10th, and then we write it out. There's a lot of rules on this, and part of it is it's all about consistency. That way one person doesn't do it one way. There's a lot of ways to do addresses, and it's just a way to keep it equal. So, but she used to work at the office on 4th Avenue. So if we remember, because this is before the number 9, we would actually write F-O-U-R-T-H, Avenue, and we would write Avenue out. So you can circle Avenue, you can actually just circle 4th. You don't have to write that above it. That would be fine. John is adverse to attending the after party. Well, what it'll say is adverse and averse are two different words. If you look up, and that's one of these where there's a little bit of trickiness to it, because sometimes, like, for example, I use adverse, and it is under adverse, but sometimes if it had been under averse, then you would have been on a different page. So you kind of, if you didn't realize what the mistake was, and I had averse, you may be looking, pages back in the AV area and miss it. But in this case, it is right, and it says adverse, averse. It says adverse means unfavorable. He predicted adverse weather. Averse means reluctant or opposed to. And so John is adverse. He is opposed to or reluctant, so it's actually A-V-E-R-S-E. And then after party, this is one that I actually kind of want to look up, but I'm pretty sure it's hyphenated, and yes, in fact, it is. It says it's hyphenated. There's no description. It just gives that entry. The way we use after party is we hyphenate it. And so you would just enter in a hyphen. Or I think in the book it actually did like a double line for a hyphen, didn't it? So there you go. Now, number 8, I would choose Delta Airlines if I had to choose among Delta and Southwest Airlines Company. Now, one of the things is there's a entry on airlines in the book. And this is actually one of these where I wrote this quiz a few years ago, and these could all be very much different because sometimes these names change. But one of the things is it has airlines, and that entry is actually on the page before. over here, oh, you can't actually see it, airlines, gives a bunch of information, you know, like on the first reference, use the full name, things like that. But the other thing it says is that it actually gives you a list of the airlines. It'll say American Airlines, Fort Worth, owned by American Airlines, Delta Airlines, Atlanta. It tells you where they're at. And so what it says on first reference, the name of Delta Airlines is Delta Airlines, Inc. So on first reference, the first time you use it in the paper or in the story, you should have the proper name. And so you need to actually add, you know, give a space, capitalize the L, add Inc. Okay? With a period. And I would choose Delta, whereas Southwest Airlines is actually, sorry, just looking on the wrong page. Southwest is actually one word, no capitalization on airlines. And it's airlines company, so you do that, right? And that pulls it together, and then we abbreviate company. Now, usually you do abbreviate company, Inc., things like that. But the idea there is since this is a proper name, we would actually abbreviate it. Now, in this, not abbreviate. We would use whatever nomenclature, however they spell it. Delta spells theirs as 2s, Southwest spells theirs as 1. Is there a right or wrong? Well, for AP style, you know, in general, we prefer one word, no space. But because Delta is, because Delta Airlines chooses to do it differently, we adhere to whatever their name is. That's their name, right? I mean, if your name is Cindy and you spell it Cyndie, you know, that's how you spell it. And that's how I should spell it. And since that's the way Delta Airlines spells it, we'll spell it according to their policy. And that's just, you know, that's just the way it's done. And so you look that up and you follow their policy. All right, the district attorney accused her of allegedly taking a bribe. Well, there's a couple of things here. There's, you know, you can look up probably the accused entry on that, but the alleged entry is also one that you would probably want to look at. Both of those would apply here. You wouldn't want to call somebody an accused bribe taker or something like that. Accused, corrupt accusee or something like that. But instead, you know, you look at the alleged. It says the word must be used with great care. Avoid any suggestion the writer is making an allegation. Specify the source of the allegations. That's done. Use alleged bribe or similar phrase when necessary to make clear that there's an unproved action. Avoid, where possible, alleged victim. Avoid redundant uses of alleged, like the district attorney alleged that she took a bribe, or the district. It is proper to say the district attorney alleged that she took a bribe, or the district attorney accused her of taking a bribe, but not the district attorney accused her of allegedly taking a bribe. So, as you can see, this is pretty much taken directly from that entry right there, right? The district accused her of taking a bribe, or the district alleged she took a bribe. Either of those would be okay, but it's redundant. It's just overly being like, he accused her of allegedly. Well, he's alleging something, he's accusing, they're the same thing. All right, the committee must choose between Springfield, Quincy, and Bloomington to host the first annual Illinois Festival. First of all, anytime there's an entry that should say among, comma, between. Anytime you have 3 or more, we use the word among. But if it's 2 things, it's between. Because between means, you know, kind of situated between 2 things. Among means to be selected from a group of more than 2. So if the committee must choose among Springfield, Quincy, and Bloomington to host the first annual Illinois Festival. The other thing is like with a lot of times you'll get organizations that will say, oh, it's going to be the first annual this, or the first annual that, or the second annual this, or the second annual that. Well, the problem is in AP style is a lot of times when you're working for a media organization, people will come up and they'll be like, it's going to be our first annual golf race fundraiser. It's our first annual run for fun or something like that. And that's great, and everybody has plans to do it again the next year, and then the next year they're just busy and they don't do it. Or they do it 2 years and then they don't do it a third year. Really, in order to be annual, it has to have occurred multiple years. And so, we could call it the inaugural Illinois Festival, meaning that there's a suggestion it will be beyond the first year. But typically we would just say the first Illinois Festival. And until it reaches the third, we don't use annual. It's not annual until you've had at least 3. April Fool's Day. So, you look that up, and I'm pretty sure it's April is capitalized, Fool's Day is capitalized, and you spell, I don't think there's a hyphen on fool, but that will be one of these things that actually will look up. Oh, there is a hyphen on that, and it happens to be, it's April Fool's S apostrophe. So you want to use the style that's in there. So capitalize, add a hyphen. The auto workers is one word that's in, will all drive Ford trucks to the Saturn factory. I don't think that all is in there, but let me just check real quick to make sure. Yeah, it's just about hyphenating it. I was going to say there might be a little bit of, the auto workers will drive Ford trucks to the Saturn factory. All could be seen as a little bit redundant, but that's unnecessary. This numbers 12 and 13 should say question before them. I think these are actually questions. And so that is actually an error on there. But since I'm doing this as a test, I think that'll be okay. So, you can look up there, it has information about the atomic age. So you can look up atomic age, QST. And so they actually, it looks like they may have moved that entry or eliminated it because I'm not seeing it right offhand. That's one that probably is a case where you probably would Google it if you didn't find it, and then you would probably be like question mark, and I would give you a point for coming up with an answer or not coming up with one, because you would have pointed out that this question needs to be removed. Who is Asperger's syndrome named after? Well, you can look up Asperger's after Hans Asperger. So you just write Hans Asperger. And it says he's an Austrian pediatrician. It's a milder form of autism, wants a separate diagnosis, but now part of a broader thing called autism spectrum disorder. They don't use the word Asperger's anymore. And it is lowercase s. That is not mistaken. And then it says the British Army is the #1 force in Europe. The only thing is Army is not actually the name of their military. Their military is actually like the British Armed Forces or the British, infantry or something like that. It's not proper name. It's not Army. Whereas the United States is the U.S. Army is the proper name of our Army, and we have the U.S. Navy is the proper name. And so only the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy do we capitalize the A. Any other, we don't. And I don't know if that's because they don't use that as their proper name, or if it's just we have that rule for the United States. But I'm 100% sure that the U.S. Army does call themselves the U.S. Army. That is a proper noun, and that is the rule. And you can actually look that up under the word Army, and it says capitalize when referring to U.S. forces, the U.S. Army, the Army, Army regulations. Do not use the abbreviation USA. Use lowercase for the forces of other nations, the French Army, lowercase a. And then it refers you to other military titles. So you would go through this, and then what would happen is